Welcome to another insightful episode of Stripping the Dipping. You're joined by a dynamic duo of the co-hosts, Denzel Clarkson and F1blag. And joining us today on this episode, we've got a leading correspondent from The Sun and an individual that's at the forefront of sports journalism. So without further ado, please welcome our guest today. We have the one and only Ben Hunt in the building. Ben, how's everything
Hey,
going? And, what have
yeah,
you
all
been up
good.
to in the recent weeks leading up to the
Oh
F1 after the summer break?
man, it's been a very busy few weeks, hasn't it? We've had 3 races in a row. I was working out something. It's oh god, it's just been relentless. Just the amount of flights, hotels, hire cars. It's just been one thing after another, and we've got a little bit of a break now before the flyaways start again. So it's a little bit of time just to catch my breath and sort of meet my family again. For just reacquaint myself with them because it's been very hectic.
We could imagine, Ben. It's a very relentless life. And as you know, with F1, and we call it almost like following the circus, there's
Yeah.
always something at the forefront of, the news, the papers, kind of the
Yeah.
media, and always a story to cover or something kind of going on behind the scenes. So
It
more than
doesn't
happy to
stop.
kind of explore that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
sure, sure.
Exactly. So, we'll start off first, Ben, as we like to do with most of our special guests. Like, what were your earliest motorsport memories growing up? And career-wise as well, for the younger kids out there, like,
Mm,
looking maybe to follow the kind of career and the passion that you have.
yep.
How did your journey go through the early phases of, like, your career leading up to your role working with the Sun?
Yeah, sure. I initially wanted to be a football reporter, and I am still a football reporter. I love football. That was my first love. But I was 7 years old when I realised I wasn't good enough to be a professional footballer. So it's quite early on. And I remember writing to a sports editor of a newspaper, a national newspaper, because there was a mistake in the paper, and I was like, "Look, this is a mistake." They incorrectly labelled the Wimbledon goalie, which has been my team. And I also said, like, "Look, I'm really interested in being a sports journalist. Could you let us know what I need to do?" And kindly they did write back and sent me a leaflet, a guide how to get into journalism. And basically, it said that you needed to do your A levels, go to university, and then do a postgraduate diploma in journalism, and eventually you'd hopefully get a job. That is the blueprint that I was given, and I kind of followed it to the letter. That is exactly what I did. So alongside my studies, I worked for my local newspaper for free. I used to deliver that newspaper, and then all of a sudden I just said, "Look, any chance I could write some football reports?" And they allowed me to do that at non-league level, and I carried on. And then I did my degree, my postgraduate diploma, lots of work experience, at lots of different places. And then I was offered my first chance, an agency in London called Haters, very well-known agency. And when you're there, you're kind of working for the newspapers, but you don't get the necessarily the recognition or the byline. So you'd go to games and press conferences, do the interviews, type them up, send them across, but then they often appear in the paper under someone else's name. So it's quite dispiriting, but it's also a good place to learn, to make your mistakes, to get them over and done with. And I did make a few mistakes, and it kind of teaches you a lot. And then I was at Haters. I left for another agency at Wardles, and then eventually I started working for the Sun, almost on a freelance basis. And then one evening I was approached by the sports editor who said to me, "Do you fancy doing Formula One?" And I was like, "Absolutely." I'd kind of followed it as a kid. You mentioned my earliest memory, probably '94. Senna's death. I remember where my dad worked at a newspaper, and I remember being at the newspaper and him coming in and telling me, it's really busy in there because of what's happened. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all started. So I started covering F1 for the Sun in 2012, and I've been doing it ever since. So I don't know how many races I've done, but it's into three figures, of course. And yeah, it's good fun. I've seen lots of changes, Bernie Ecclestone and into Liberty Media. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Wow, that is very insightful there, Ben. And there's so many key talking points to kind of take away from what you just said there as well, in terms of, firstly of all, your keen eye for detail and attention to detail as well. When you kind of spotted that mistake in a newspaper and called them out on it, and even today, I think that us as the fans, we almost hold the media to account, to
Yeah.
challenge some of the things that happen. And I'm sure F1blag will probably delve into that route later down in this
Yeah.
podcast as well. But also, as you mentioned too, going through those countless years of work experience, and I'm sure
Yeah.
like you mentioned, it wasn't just that you graduated from university and there was just a offer on the table from the sun straight there
Correct.
and then, but just years of this grafting and kind
Yeah.
of learning your own craft and being able to be unique in your own way. So when you do have your articles, even like I guess with your name not being on the earlier ones, the
Mm.
style and kind of the approach you take to it would be different to most, and what would grab the audience and the listeners in as well when they're checking your articles out and reading through it. So I could see the kind of link and the almost the symmetry of your career progression as well, which is great to see. So to kick things off a bit further there, Ben, setting the scene of a
Yeah.
Formula One news correspondence,
Mhm.
could you tell us kind of like, could you describe what traveling to different Grand Prix is like, what some of the marketing events are like as well, and how you prepare for
Sure.
those? And also kind of what are your funniest moments or most memorable Grand Prix weekends that you've attended so far?
Yeah, sure. I have to have a little think about the funny ones because they become a conveyor belt. So you arrive at one and then you're looking at the next. It's
Mhm.
really weird. It's like, and I still find it weird when you say to someone like last week in Milan, "See you in Singapore." It's just such a weird phrase to utter. Um, Similarly, I remember in my very first year, 2012, I remember being in a train station in Monaco, or it was just outside Monaco, and ordering a return to Monte Carlo. Like to say that phrase, I think is one of those moments where the sort of penny drops. I think we do take a lot for granted. We are very fortunate in the job that we do. Certainly myself, I'm not a freelance, so my company pay for my travel and my expenses when I'm away. So I'm in a very fortunate position, and I never forget that. But it is, sometimes you just take it for granted. You just like on to the next race. So, you see you in Singapore or see you in Austin, Texas, or whatever it is. And it just becomes a phrase you say. It's like going to work. It's like, see you on Monday type thing. So, yeah, it's quite surreal. What it's like working, because we're not part of a team. The team's travel is all done by one or two people who are travel experts. So if you're working for an F1 team, you literally go to the factory, you drop your car off, and you meet up with everyone else, and then you're on a bus to the airport. You check in, you travel together, you get out the other end, you get on a bus, you go to the hotel, and that's pretty much the way that it works. It's kind of everything's done for you. Whereas for us journalists, it's a little bit different. We're independents, and a lot of the time is booking travel and researching. So we have to source the hotels, source the routes, source the flights. I then send them for approval and for a booking company, and hopefully that all gets booked and sorted. But of course, then when you arrive at the destination, it's up to you to get to the hotel that you're at. Now, sometimes you don't know what this hotel is going to be like. You don't know what public transport's going to be like. Sometimes you need to hire a car. So there's a lot of logistics. When people go on holiday, sometimes if you've not done a package holiday and you've got to think for yourself when you get out the other end of that terminal, and sometimes it can be a mind-boggling place after a long flight and totally different culture, different language, different money. There's loads of different factors that you've all of a sudden got to get up to speed with quickly. So the travel aspect is a really big part of it. I think it's underplayed by a lot of journalists. I think we just, as I mentioned before, you just take stuff for granted. If you've been to Japan once, twice, three times, all of a sudden it becomes easier the fourth and fifth time that you go. But the reality is it's never really that easy. Traveling during COVID was very different as well, and you've really got to be on top of things. So recently I'm always moaning on Twitter about delays, it seems, and cancelled flights. So that is another thing to contend with. But the reality is, as soon as you get to the track, you switch on to a different mode, and you're focused and you're working.
Absolutely, and it's intriguing just to kind of see the balance as well between, the human element of it as well, like you mentioned, traveling,
Yeah.
having to kind of acquaint yourself with maybe unfamiliar kind of places as well, because with Formula One, they're always going to new circuits, always expanding in new parts of the world that we've never
Yeah.
really been to before and explored. And like you mentioned as well, there's also that professional element of when you get there, kind of this, lining up the kind of questions, the agenda,
Hmm.
keeping in the loop of what's going on. And, it's very all encompassing. So I'm sure our
Yeah.
fans will take a lot into that. And then, yeah, I mean, was there any kind of moments you'd say are really funny in particular to a Grand Prix weekend, or just like one
I
particular
have,
moment that
I
sticks out?
have, I have a lot of fun. I like to play jokes on people, so sometimes it probably wouldn't be appropriate to name them, but I do tend to have a laugh when I can do. When I'm away, I think we need that as a little bit to keep sane, really, most of the time. But it's sort of hijinks. There's certainly races that I enjoy more than others. Things like Austin are great, Mexico's great. A lot of the flyaways tend to be good, and you have a good group. You also asked about social things, didn't you, and what media events?
Yeah.
There's different. It depends where you go, really. There's different functions. There was a couple in Monza last week, and there will be a couple in Singapore. But those things have definitely been scaled back in more recent years than in previous years. So I think that's as teams readjust their budgets and various different other reasons. But yeah, I mean, there's always bits and pieces going on. There's always a press event somewhere. But yeah, there's been some good ones in the past. There have been, yeah.
Ah, that's so exciting. Okay, well, I'm gonna hand you over to our other co-host, the brilliant F1 Blag. Blag, you can jump in.
Thank you. Hi, Ben. Fantastic to
Hello.
speak. I'm just going to ask some short questions because I'm
Sure.
fascinated. I'm on the Sun website looking at
Yeah.
your articles. Do you write your
Hmm.
own headlines?
No, I don't. And people do ask this, but I remember having that spat with Toto, about getting a headline, and I don't do headlines. Sometimes, they'll take a headline out of my intro and use that, but there's a whole team of sub editors that come up with the headlines. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they make me wince, but generally they're pretty good. Some of those headlines.
Yeah, I was going to say I can imagine you like booking a train or getting on a flight and then having to quickly be creative. What can
Yep.
I get? Because there's some gold on here. You've got wheel come good, spelt WHEEL.
Yep.
My favorite is Take It to the Max. I think that's good.
Yeah.
That's after Max won the race. Rear view. So when Hamilton was talking about instead of being the DRS train, he'll be on the iPad watching Game of Thrones. There's so
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite funny.
I think that's a skill. I mean, it is what it
Yeah.
is. We have a competition at work for, headline of the month, as it were,
Mm.
and there were various different winners of that. But yeah, it's part of the Sun's identity. I think that I'm quite fortunate that I work for a publication that doesn't take itself too seriously, and we can still have a light-hearted approach to headlines. It doesn't have to be all serious all the time. So I like to have fun with words, and of course, normally I have a little bit of fun with an intro. That's my creative side of things, but of course, the guys in the office go next level with some of the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, like for those wondering, and go check it out. There are obviously respectful headlines when you need to. When Formula One
Sure.
was paying tribute to the Queen, I don't think there were too many jokes. It was more sort of F1 remembers and so on. But that's
Yeah.
fascinating. You obviously we don't want to get you into trouble or embarrass any of your friends, but you talked about the circus and
Yep.
traveling, and you mentioned sort of in a way you've got on the one hand the teams and they're kind of
Hmm.
traveling in a block, and then actually as a journalist you are
Yep.
probably traveling on your own, but there are others in your boat, right? There are other journalists
Yeah. Yeah.
going around. So I mean, have you formed some close friendships along over the last decade?
Yeah, definitely. You tend to spend more time with them than you do your family. So, I spend around 140 days, something like that, a year away from home. And of course, that's a lot of time in a press room to be with or sat opposite someone. So, yeah, you do make friends. You spend a lot of time with them. I've got Chris Medland from Racer coming to stay with me this weekend. We've got Goodwood Revival, and it's near where I live, so we're going to go along to that. So, but yeah, we meet up and play golf in between races as well. So, there's a few of us that meet up and sometimes go for a beer in London. But of course, we're always meeting up at racetracks, so we see enough of each other really. So it's good though. I mean, it's good to have friends. If you do have any problems, if you're not very well, if you can't get to the track, or you're having a bit of a travel disaster, like the other day when my flight was cancelled and I was ended up at Gatwick for 27 hours, they can help you out. They can send you on some quotes or ask some questions on your behalf. So that's kind of how it works. Sort of no man gets left behind, and we all dig each other out. So it's quite a nice relationship that we have.
I mean, that sounds really, really nice, actually. There's a kind of esprit de corps, or whatever the word is for that, coming together.
Yeah, there is, because if you're on the other side of the world and something's not right. So, for example, a couple of them went to Australia earlier this year. That's a long old slog to get to Melbourne. If you can do it in 26 hours, you've done well. And one of the boys was feeling ill. Another one tested positive for COVID. And of course, they're both confined to their hotel rooms. And then, you need your mates then to start helping you out and getting you some food and, medical equipment or whatever you needed. And of course, I'm pleased to say that they were helped out in this instance. And I think if you didn't have that, then it would be a very lonely job and also a very difficult job to do.
Well, I'm glad that there's a kind of a gang of you that sort of get on. Obviously, when we watch TV and in some elements of the media, you see older drivers sort of appearing here and there. Have you formed any sort of relationships with either older drivers or even current drivers as you've gone around the world, or are they sort of kept a bit separate?
No, I think, if you're looking at sort of, the English-speaking ones, then, I've been interviewing them either when they were racing, someone like Jensen or Paul di Resta, or even Nico Rosberg. I've got that relationship from them, and I've seen how they're different on the other side, now that they are working within the media. And then, of course, the older ones as well. I never had any relationship with them prior to joining F1 in 2012, but since then, I mean, you speak to him quite a lot. You see him in the paddock. It's inevitable that you talk about stuff. It's not always just F1. Sometimes you just talk about life, or take Damon Hill for instance. Speak to him about surfing. Something along those lines, or it could be anything. Karun as well. I speak to him quite a lot about other subjects other than F1. It's just whatever you happen to stumble across. We're all together. We're all in the same boat, and it's like a place of work. The paddock is an open place of work, but you will bump into people and chat. It's just inevitable that will happen.
Yeah, I can imagine. You mentioned Damon Hill, and your first memory of Formula One's the same as mine, actually. And Damon disappeared for a bit, I guess, from the public eye, right, after he retired, and he's back on Sky, and it's fascinating. Yeah. When you talk about him surfing, since he's come back, I've got a much more sort of hippie vibe from Damon. Yeah. I mean, what's he like? Is he like that?
100%. Yeah, he's very. He sees things differently to everyone else, and I think he's not afraid to speak his mind. He is a deep thinker as well, which helps. He's a very considered person, and I really like the depth that Damon brings to Sky's coverage. I think he's a good addition to that. He's able to provide a different insight, but that F1 podcast that he does is also very good as well, where, as I say, he's not afraid to speak his mind, and sometimes you get some good quotes out of him from that podcast, and perhaps other former drivers wouldn't be willing to say what they think because they think it might be a bit too controversial. So even recently, if you think back to the Latifi situation in Monza, Damon's turned around and said, look, he's got to go, get rid of him now. And, most people will be like, oh, hang on a minute, you can't say that. But Damon seems to think that's his view, and he's not afraid to say it. So great, perfect. It's great for me. It's good for stories. And as I say, I like the fact that he's honest and able to bring something different.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. You've brought us here. I wasn't going to go here, but just sort of talking about Latifi for a second. He's had quite a difficult sort of 3/4 of a season. The end of last year, and then for this season.
Yeah, he's done. What has he done? Like, he must be getting on to 70 races now or something. I don't know the number. So it's not just a difficult season, half a season. He's been there a long time, and a really nice guy, but he's just not quick enough. And I know the reasons why he's there. Everyone does, the family and the money and everything else. But I think if Williams are serious, I think that they've got to look at this situation. There's half a chance that they could make some good points in the final end of the season, depending on how Alex is now, obviously, given his recent surgery. But there's real potential there in that team, and I think that they're given the impression under new owners of Doralton that they've got money and that they can make progress. And in order to make progress as a team, you need to have two very good drivers. And I think if I was in charge of that team, I wouldn't hesitate about getting Nick in the car from the foreseeable future.
Well, he certainly showed the potential of the car in Monza, jumping in at short notice. Well, you said Damon Hill was a guy that doesn't hold back. I think you've just shown that you're quite willing to offer an opinion. I
think you have to be, don't you? I mean, I think that if you're a correspondent working within an organisation, I think you have to have an opinion. I think reporting other people's opinions is all very well and good, but ultimately you need to form your own judgment. One of my earliest tutors was like, the way you write a story is imagining you're in a pub and you're telling your mates what happened. And I think you're very concise, you boil it down, but you obviously have an opinion about that, whether it be a football match, a goal, or F1 race, or whatever. And you inject your own opinion into the way that you tell it to your friends. And I think it's inevitable, and that as a journalist, you should have that within you, the ability to make an opinion and stand by it. If you get it wrong and people correct you, as the internet does from time to time on Twitter, definitely. If you're able to put your hands up and say, yeah, okay, fair enough, I was wrong on that, then great.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, let me ask you a bit of an opinion before I hand back to Denz, which is, you've revealed it already. I tend to do a bit of LinkedIn stalking before all my interviews to sort of look at CVs. You're on your 10th. This is your 10th anniversary season, right? So this must be your 11th season. Yeah. So going back to 2012, I mean, Schumacher was still on the grid.
He was.
Maldonado won his race, etc., etc. It seems a long time ago. What would you say has changed? What are the main things that have changed?
The biggest change for me is an easy one, and that is the demographic of fan. When I used to go to those races at the start, I would always be a bit surprised because I come from a football background, and football did a very good job of attracting female fans, but certainly younger fans. And when I went to F1, I was like, everyone is a lot older. Everyone was wearing old merchandise, so really old McLaren tops, really old Williams gear. And I was like, oh my God, this is really odd. It's like stuck in a time warp. And of course, that was because obviously part of it was the approach that the old owners had. And I think that the new owners and opening it up, and definitely Drive to Survive, I know the prices have gone up, or say the same in probably some countries, but generally the prices have gone up. But the age and the demographic of fan is completely different. So, for instance, if I take the Hungarian Grand Prix this year, you're coming in and there's, male and female, super young, like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Whereas, and you can see that they're not only from Hungary, they've made the effort to travel from Holland or wherever else they've come because they're head to toe in max gear or something. But previously, there would always be a lot of Finns in Hungary, but generally male and generally older than me. So that for me is the biggest change that I've seen, and that's the audience. The F1 audience has changed. Singly, that is the biggest difference.
That's fascinating, and I think something that now you mention it is very, very apparent. I'll hand over to Denz now. He's got a couple more questions. Denz, over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Blag. And it's really interesting just to hear that kind of tidbit there as well, because there's a lot to unpack, especially, when you're talking about like forming your own opinion, and then also how the landscape of Formula One has changed over the kind of years as well. So I'm actually going to ask these questions back to front as such. But Ben, what we try to do on this podcast as well, and what we've been delving into, is something I like to call motorsport diversity, in a sense of not just covering F1 because, everybody in the dog has an F1 podcast these days, but, trying to
Yeah.
actually delve into some other motorsport series that we can
Yeah, okay,
engage
fine.
other people into. And of course, as well, encourage people to go and check out too. So I think as Georgina mentioned, we've had Raffaello Marcello, we've had a couple of IndyCar guys over
Yeah.
as well. From a journalistic point of view, Ben, like how should people credit these series? Should they be judged in their own right, as their own kind of marquee flagship kind of motorsport events?
Yeah.
Or do people that are probably more so Europeans have a right to perceive, series such as the SRO GT3, the Indycar, the WEC as well as kind of like inferior feeder series?
Yeah. Again, this is an attitude thing which I've noticed a shift, certainly in recent years, and that is, when I first came in, it was very snobby in the sense that people looked down at other championships who worked in Formula One. I should say, people in F1 looked down at other championships. They looked down at WEC and didn't even consider GT racing, and IndyCar was just in the distance. It wasn't anything. But I think that recently we've seen a shift. I think that extra coverage in the UK has helped of the IndyCar series. I think Alonso going to WEC definitely helped increase that profile of that championship. And I just think that we're a bit more rounded as motorsport fans. We're probably a bit more spoilt in the sense that we have a greater access to it. And that is an issue because I think that behind a paywall makes it quite difficult, but through YouTube and obviously streams, people seem to be able to find the ability to watch anything they want these days. I think that if you have that ability, you will seek it out, and I think we're spoilt with the actual quality of motorsport across all series. So if you look at MotoGP, some fantastic races there at the moment, going to some great countries and really enjoying, boom time, even after, Rossi. Who would have thought we'd be saying that? I know the British Grand Prix attendance was down, but generally the racing this year has been fantastic and so many great stories there. And similarly in things like Formula E, some good stories, going to some great destinations, some great drivers. So I think that people are starting to, look around other championships. And if you do fall out of F1 and go somewhere else, I don't think there's the snobbery anymore of someone's definitely failed. I think it's people are like, okay, well, fine, you can, earn a good career here and we're not going to think anything less of you. It's fine. It's just the way that it works. So that's good to see. I think that we're, more acceptable of other championships now.
That's really interesting, Ben. And then kind of on the topic of this as well, kind of a similar theme too. We've had rumors that, Colton Herta, the son of the legendary Brian Herta even, might be making an entry into Formula One through AlphaTauri should obviously Pierre Gasly get released to go to Alpine. Yeah. And just on the kind of topic of this as well, like driver profile, I think is kind of the thing I'm aiming for here, Ben. Yeah. How important is it, for a driver's profile if they're looking to get into a big team? Because I don't know if you're following this kind of story as well. There's been like a legal dispute in one of the IndyCar teams, being Alex Palou and Chip Ganassi. Yeah. Over essentially, I think it was Alex Palou's people essentially trying to get a deal lined up with Zach Brown. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of coming to the conclusion that maybe that agreement might have been drawn up on the fact that Zach Brown had seen that Alex Palou had this YouTube account with over 100,000 subscribers on it, and other kind of extraneous things like that, other than, being the driver themselves. How much does the actual relatability or the marketability of the driver, apply in getting kind of like a role in one of the top teams these days, you feel?
I think, well, let's take away top teams, but I'll reply to your sentence and just say F1 teams. And I think it's still very key. I think that, it wasn't that long ago we had a Russian driver driving around badly because of the money that his dad was able to bring to the team. And I think that's the problem. I think that F1 needs to reevaluate that process, because with the cost cap, money isn't that important. I say that loosely and with sort of speech marks around that, the word that. But of course, I think ultimately, if it's a championship that wants to have the best drivers in the world, then it should be purely on ability. But unfortunately, the marketability and also the money that they bring in is still a considerable factor. I think that Esteban Ocon probably was the last driver to come into F1 as someone who didn't have any backing. Maybe Alex Albon to a certain extent, but they've all got wealthy parents. They've all been backed quite heavily from a young age by big manufacturers through karting. So that obviously tells its own story, and I think that we need to probably get rid of that model and start picking up the best drivers, whether they're male or female, and supporting them and seeing them get into the championship. I think marketability does still hold sway. I think that there's certain drivers in F1 who remain in the sport purely because of their name and the money that they can bring in. And okay, I'll say one driver, someone like Robert Kubica, for instance, a great driver, had his accident, yet he's still coming in every now and again for an FP1. And you think, crikey, surely there must be another driver that team can look at, because I don't expect them to hand him a drive. So what is it actually that they're utilizing? Is it experience? Well, hang on a minute, they've already got experience in that team already. When what's the purpose? Why are they getting him in? And then of course you get the cynical person that says, well, he's only there because of the money. And you think, that's crazy. Surely F1 and the team do not need the money. Surely they need the best driver in that car that weekend. And I think that's where the situation is a little bit confusing. And until that model changes, then I think you're going to see mixed up grids in all the championships because of that reason.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I think for the fans as well and the listeners, it's also for them to kind of see the reality of how these things play out and how they create factors in Formula One. And actually, when you look across the pond and you see different series, how the money kind of thing isn't such a prevalent factor. So the actual quality of the racing is much better, although it doesn't have, like, as the youngsters say these days, the clout that Formula One does because of the prestige. So absolutely.
It's an interesting one though, isn't it? I mean, if all of a sudden you've got a championship, it doesn't have to be IndyCar, it could be anywhere, and all of a sudden you've got a field of very competitive drivers, then that championship can really thrive. Because I think that people aren't massively, I think people could be swayed, is what I'm trying to say. I think that Formula One does have that history and that whole appeal. But I think if you created a championship with really good racing drivers, all doing fantastically well each weekend, then there's massive potential for a championship like that.
So true. And Ben, we're gonna kind of go to a different kind of field here as well. With your kind of work as well, there's the good side of it, as we looked at, and the glamorous side, but often or not as well, there's the challenging aspects of it. And what I wanted to kind of find out from you was, how do you go about like building rapport with the more difficult teams or drivers? And also, it's kind of like double barrel the question. There are also times where we have to kind of discuss very controversial topics or things which, a lot of people have very polarizing views or responses on. How do you go about like your approach to kind of, writing those stories and narrating them in a way that's authentic, but also tells, kind of like both sides of the story of such?
The first one about relationship with the teams. Of course, I know the teams. I've been doing it long enough for that. But there are teams that I don't massively deal with on a regular basis, and they're ones that I deal every day with. People like Mercedes. I speak to them probably more because the two British drivers, McLaren, because of Lando as well. So they're the sort of teams that I will be dealing with. But if a situation arrives at a team further down the grid or wherever, I still have the ability to phone the press officer and say, look, any chance I could get an answer from you on this particular topic. And I think that generally the teams are very responsive and understand that. In terms of reporting difficult stuff, it depends on what the story is. I think that you need to judge what the story is and call it how you see fit. So if it's a row, then you need to get all the facts right, understand it, and then if you're able to make a decision or insert your own feelings into the piece, and you're allowed to do that with your editor's permission, then fine, go for it. But you have to stand by it, as I said earlier on, but also be prepared to be, willing to correct if you do realize you've made a mistake, because we all make mistakes. It's all based on, what we're told. One team may tell you one thing, one team may tell you something completely different, and then you obviously need to decide for yourself what you think is truth. And it's kind of, you back yourself, and I think that's the strength, that's the ability to hang in there and to do the job for this amount of time, is that you back yourself to make the right call on that particular story. And as I say, you just report it how you see fit. But it does depend on what the story is.
Absolutely, and I think that's fair. And obviously, with the line of work as well, Ben, I think a thick skin is required these days, because you do get a lot of people out there trolling and just kind of being a nuisance. And I think if everyone has their own kind of way of dealing with it, but I think if people find their own way, of kind of like not allowing that,
100%. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for an aspiring journalist now, is that you can get absolutely taken to pieces on the internet, but the reality is, I don't really bother what those people say. Obviously, if they're making valid points, then I will reply and say, yeah, sure, you're right. If it's just absolute abuse, then you just block and move on, or reply with a thumbs up or something like that. You can't take it to heart. A lot of these people, you'll never see in your life, and you shouldn't worry too much, although it may be painful if you've written an article and you because obviously when you do that, when you first start, you're actually putting a piece of yourself out there, and you're always worried about how people are going to take it. And of course, if you do get negative feedback, then it's quite hard at first, but then you just need to have thick skin and just take it on the chin and move on. As hard as that seems, you just need to dig deep and find that ability, because you always find someone that doesn't like the article that you've written, or the publication that you're working for, or the headline that you've put on the piece, or the mistake you've made in the 14th paragraph. There's always someone willing to criticize, so that never stops.
Absolutely. And Blag, I'll tag you back in as well, because I know you've got questions kind of on the same topic. So I'll let you in.
Yeah, and we spoke to thanks, Denz. We spoke to Matt Gallagher, who's done work on WTF1, and he said something similar about, like, over time you get better at sort of processing the trolls, even though it's not a good thing. You kind of work through it. And I guess in terms of I don't know what word you'd use for it, polarization maybe. The one topic really that dominated over the last year was Abu Dhabi at the end of the season. And there are kind of different camps, obviously, as you might imagine. Were you at the race?
Yes, I was. Yeah. I was there on my own. Some organisations had 2 staff there to share the workload. I was on my own. I had I can't remember if it was 8-page or 10-page pullout, and I had written every single word of this pullout, and it was all ready to go. And then half a lap from the end, that goes in the dustbin. So all that work, no one will ever see, because it all got pulped. So, absolutely devastated from a personal point of view, seeing all that work go up in smoke, but also a really disgusting end to the year. It had been such a wonderful championship up until that point. And both drivers deserve to win that championship based on their previous performances, and to go into that final race level on points after all those races and all that COVID nonsense that we'd gone through and everything was incredible. And then of course the outcome wasn't what anyone, well, apart from Max Verstappen and the Max Verstappen fans, but it wasn't what we wanted. I think as fans, we wanted it to see it be decided as per the rule book, which is what we obviously got at the weekend, and no one liked that either, but that's another story. I think it just left a bitter taste, and I think that even worse for me, after that, it was all a mess, obviously, but the way that it was handled, the FIA saying they were going to do an investigation, the rumours, Massey just totally disappearing, and then obviously him getting axed and from the role, and then that report came out just before the first race of the year, before I think it was practice 3. It was just all so wrong. And when that report came out, it was just so weak. It didn't address anything that we needed the answers to. Had he been influenced and what was said and what was done, that it was missing all that content. It was just a pure review of what we already knew. And that left me feeling a little bit hollow and a little bit sad with regards to the governance of the sport. And I think that people need to realise that there's 2 organisations here, or 3 actually. You've got the teams, you've got F1, which is Liberty Media, and then you've got the FIA, and they all need to work together. But that was a clear example of none of them working together. And I get very frustrated because I like to think that F1's great, healthy, moving along in the right direction, as I mentioned, Drive to Survive and younger audiences and, great racing. But at the end of that year, from a sporting perspective, forget the actual result, was just wrong. It was just a really bad end to a really good championship, and it made F1 look really stupid. And I struggle with that because I think it could be so much better. And then you feel like you've got to explain F1 again, and to people don't worry, this was just a one-off. It's not really that bad. It's actually quite a good championship. But I mean, the weird thing now, however many months on, I look at it upon that decision as F1's sort of Maradona moment, the handball, the hand of God. It's the thing that we'll all be talking about in years and years and years to come as an injustice. But it will also just be seen as being accepted. And I think that's a strange position to be in if you rewind back to Abu Dhabi there and then, because I thought that it was all going to be resolved. I didn't think that we would have this mess and this question mark over Max's first championship. In actual fact, I'm pretty glad the way that he's going to win this one this year, because it's so convincing. It's kind of, okay, fine, now you've got your championship, if you know what I mean. You've won this one properly. So it just didn't leave a very nice taste in my mouth. I was sort of pleased that Max won, but wasn't pleased the way he did it. And then, as I say, for me, the way the FIA failed to address the questions in their own report, having taken 2.5 months or 3 months to come up with this report, that's just not acceptable. Not for a massive international sport, with millions and millions of pounds at stake. That's not acceptable.
No, and I was trying to think of that football analogy, because you were talking. We're probably of a similar vintage, you and I, but I don't quite remember the '86 World Cup. But right. Of course, I think Maradona scored a second goal in that match.
He did,
and so it kind of killed the game. Yeah, which was sort of saying, well, okay, that was a handball, but they won the game based on that second goal.
Correct, and that's almost Max this year, I'd argue. A fantastic championship, not doing anything wrong. So, it's quite weird, that parallel between football and Formula One. But I cut you off there. What was you?
I think I was agreeing with that partially. I think this season it seems like Max he's probably already won it, right? He could win it in the next race, and we're sort of 6 races from the end.
Yeah,
I guess the thing that people can't square in their heads, right, is that when we're talking about, there'll be a load of Americans listening to this going, "What are you talking about, Maradona, '86 quarterfinal
yes,
of the World
Cup?"
That's right. England versus Argentina, with a lot of players that no one other than us will remember. But anyway, I guess the thing about that match, trying to draw the analogy, is that it was a single kind of match, and England lost a single kind of unit. They lost the game. Because there was some cheating, but there was also some brilliance. And I suppose the problem, personally for me, and I found Abu Dhabi almost an awakening, which not in a good way. That when you watch, I don't know, football or some of the other sports that I might be into, ultimately when they cross the line, of course you get some refereeing howlers, but the referee doesn't kind of. When you're a kid and you're like, right, next goal wins, or
he doesn't influence the outcome.
Doesn't change the rules, sort of. And so I guess, like, best case scenario, what could the FIA have done? Like, so Massey's could have made a mistake, could have been influenced, let's say. But it wasn't up to the task, in my view. The stewards ratified that decision, but what would have been a better outcome after that? It seems difficult.
Yes, it does, and I think I made this point in my column this week, and I think that the situation we've got is that the F1 rulebook has been amended. There's so much red pen over this rulebook at the moment that it's become impossible to read. And I was talking to the FIA about the fiasco on Sunday night in Monza, where it took 4 hours for them to publish the provisional grid due to penalties. And I'm pretty again. It's the same thing with me. I'm furious because this is making sport look stupid. We should have had someone sorting this out. There should be someone in my brilliant ideal world. There'll be a man that pushes a button within 5 minutes of qualifying, and we get a grid, and that's it. But of course, it wasn't. It was 4 hours, and of course, you've got people going away from the track that spent a lot of money to be there all day, not really knowing how it was all going to pan out, and will Sainz be on pole? Will Leclerc be on pole? Who's got it? Do you know what I mean? It was bonkers. But it goes back to the rule book, and that needs ripping up and redrawing, because I think until we do that, there's going to be so much of this open to interpretation. And is this what the rules mean? Do we need to check this? Because that's what's taking all the time. This is why decision making from the FIA stewards is so, it's not consistent. And we need to have clear rules that people understand, that the fans can understand as well, that we can get on with, because at the moment it's too convoluted. And all the while we're attracting new fans, FIA will do something that shoots F1 in the foot. And you think, oh my gosh, try explaining that to someone that's just tuned in for the first time. This porpoising matrix. Now, I don't get involved in the technical stuff, because that's not my bag. I know what I need to know in order to form an opinion. Okay, I get it, but it's not my most favorite subject. But they come up with this porpoising matrix and this woefully difficult calculation, and you're like, crikey, how on earth is this relatable to any of the fans watching on TV at home? It's just become too confusing. And I think that's what needs to be dialed out in the form of a new rule book, just to make it more concise and simpler for people to understand.
Right. I mean, the sport is complicated. And, you talked about being in the pub and, writing articles in a way that's sort of explaining.
Yeah.
Or you might be like getting in the barbers or whatever and getting your hair cut and explaining what you do. Like the fact that you have a safety car and then you have cars unlapping and then, blah, 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 blah. Like to get to the point where you're explaining to a layperson why it was wrong, you've got to probably spend about 2 paragraphs. So, and on that, right? So we saw, I think it was in Nuremberg, or somewhere like the Eiffel Grand Prix in 2020.
Yeah.
Massey finished the race under safety car and then said to the press, I had to finish the race under the safety car because those are the rules. Obviously at Monza, we've had, some people sort of saying, oh, what a boring finish. And the crowd, the Tifosi being upset. Yeah, it was boring. Right. Yeah. But they followed the rules. So just your opinion, what do you think was different in Abu Dhabi? And, their interpretation that, well, the race director can do whatever they want because of this rule. What do you think? Why do you think Abu Dhabi was different?
Well, this is the thing. This is what we wanted from the report. We wanted to find out what actually happened, what conversations took place. Was he influenced? He needs to come out one day and say, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. And then we can form an opinion. The rules say that it should have been a safety car end to that race. I think, given the magnitude of everything, and at the time, I remember when that crash happened, I just thought it was a red flag. I just assumed that it'd be a red flag. The car was in Latifi crashed. It was in a tricky place. I just assumed it would be red flagged. And I did the same on Sunday. I think if I put myself in the shoes of the race steward, that's what I would have done. I mean, we've seen this year, even throughout all the championships, the very hint of an accident, the first thing they do is, virtual safety car, or a red flag. There's no hesitation. They're very quick, very on it. But for some reason, on Sunday, there was no red flag. they were quite happy to let it play out towards the end. I was horrified to see the crane moving backwards onto incoming traffic on a blind bend. You know, I was in Japan when Jules Bianchi had his accident, and you know, things like that will live with me forever. And I will, you know, always hate seeing big heavy machinery being on a track or at the side of a track moving. You know, into oncoming cars. That's not right. I would have stopped the race for that. Getting back to the actual Abu Dhabi decision, I have no doubt that he was influenced. I think, you know, the fact that you know, if you parrot someone, so if you know, repeat what they say, if you listen to the conversations that Massey had, he was using words which weren't his own words. They were given to him by someone else. And I just think that was obviously in his brain. He didn't know what to do. He absolutely panicked, and he was influenced, which is why he manipulated the rules in the sense of all lapped cars, then all of a sudden the 5-lap cars. I just think that he was just caught rabbit in the headlights, didn't know what to do, and unfortunately that changed the outcome of the race. I think, you know, in his defence, and not many people are in his defence at all, because obviously, you know, the decision was wrong. You know, we need to remember that he was only an apprentice, if you like, himself. He was supposed to be working under Charlie Whiting, but of course Charlie Whiting suddenly passed away, didn't he, in Australia? And so Massey was thrust in at the deep end. And I remember talking to him at one race, and it was, you know, it was before the first Saudi race. And it was all about the travel schedule and about just how far and where he was flying to and making personal checks on the track. And I was like absolutely stunned just to learn about his schedule. He was absolutely burnt out. There was no doubt about it. You know, he was everywhere, all over the place, you know, checking and doing this and that and the other. And I don't suppose he had any time during COVID where he actually managed to get back to his family in Australia. So, you know, I think that, you know, there was a number of factors. And I just think that in the end, he was probably burnt out. But ultimately, I believe he was influenced during that race. And, you know, I think that it's testament to that the FIA acted and removed him from that position. As I say, I just think that the only thing we're missing is the actual words from him, just to let us know whether or not he was definitively, because it's all very well me speculating that he was influenced, but we won't know for sure until he actually comes out and says so. So, you know, I long for that day where we actually get the answer.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand, although, you know, this is in the internet, so who knows whether I'm just making it up. I understand that he signed a non-disclosure agreement.
He did, so, yeah, which is also very, you know, very fishy. You know, that again, I totally forgot about that point, but again, that was one of the horrible parts of it. You know, I don't like things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a smoking gun. I think I agree with you on the points you make about parroting someone's words. It's, you know, we went motor racing. That, like, exactly what Jonathan Wheatley said. Let's go motor racing. So I mean,
exactly that.
That's not exactly, like, none of us are psychologists. Maybe you are. I'm not. But
no, I'm not. I'm not. It was just strange. I've got kids, and you know, when they repeat things that my wife says, you know, I know where they've picked it up. You know, it's as simple as that. You know, when I'm getting told off by her and then by the kids, I know that I know where they've got their information from, and it's the parroting thing. So yeah.
And I mean, we'll get off this topic because you know, it's a big one, but we can move on. But before we do, I mean, the final point for me is, and this is probably the awakening, the way in which the stewards then found a justification. You know, they and look, Red Bull were in the room, and actually, if you look at the appeal documents, there is no kind of remit or standing for Mercedes to appeal kind of bad judging. They had to write something that was about Red Bull. So they wrote one that was about Max overtaking on the safety car, and another one that was, can't remember what it was about. But essentially, they couldn't say, you, Michael Massey, messed up and we're appealing it. They had to find. So I feel like the FIA being beyond sort of scrutiny, the stewards being sort of complicit in trying to find the cover up, and then, as you say, 3 months later, the report not really telling us anything is the most disappointing of it all.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not the only case. I mean, if you go back to that Ferrari engine 2019, was it? And you know, they were blitzing everyone, and then they brought in this technical regulation that changed things, and then they didn't win again. You know, and then they signed this agreement with, again, the non-disclosure. We're keeping it silent, and you know, no one's going to ever spill the beans. You know, that sort of secrecy is outrageous. You know, we need openness in the sport, and I think that's where, you know, we have a problem, because I think that F1 and Liberty have been very open, and as I keep mentioning, you know, new markets, new fans, and everything, and we need to have that openness, you know, from the governing body. There's no point doing these quiet deals on the side, because otherwise it's just murky, and we've seen stuff like that in the past, and it just doesn't sit well in the world of modern sport to have those sort of things going on.
Well, no, I completely agree, and I'll hand over to Denz now. But before I do, I'll say, like, we really rely on, you know, you as a journalist and a blue check mark to be, you know, putting this stuff in public as you're doing tonight, to say, you know, to hold these guys to account.
Yeah, and I think that there is. What I would say, I mean, I've got an interview lined up tomorrow with someone that's doing a book about journalism and media and how things have changed. And I think that I would like to add the fact that the role of journalism has obviously changed a lot. We've definitely seen fewer staff journalists attend races, and certainly more freelance, and people who are able to, you know, take on lots of gigs working for websites mainly, and podcasts and radio and all sorts of stuff. But of course, the difficulty of being freelance is that you can't be too critical. You know, for example, if you do work for Red Bull, you can't really come down and slam them, because obviously you rely on them for some of your money. So it is quite difficult. I think the role of a independent, can we call them independent journalists? I think that's sort of definitely reduced in F1. If I think about, you know, my colleagues that I work with from the UK and the number of us that attend races, but then I also look at France, Germany, Spain, the numbers have gone down. So while the press numbers and the people in the press room is probably around the same, there tend to be different types of journalists, more for, you know, the motorsports, autosports, the likes of those sort of publications. And so there's only fewer of us, shall we say, who ask the awkward ones and are willing to get stuck in, you know?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because people, perhaps they're worried about the backlash that they're going to get on social media, in the internet, or the fact that they don't care, or they're worried about, you know, maybe not getting their pass renewed next year. And you know, I'm not worried about those things. So, you know, I'm quite fortunate that, you know, I have a pass, and I hope that it's renewed, and I can't see why they wouldn't, but I'm not living in fear of that. And similarly, I'm not really too worried whether a team like what I write or not, because, you know, I'd like to think that I know them well enough that they know that I'm a moany bloke, and you know, in a few weeks' time, it's all going to be fine again when I ask them to, you know, fill up my water bottle or go in there for a can of Coke. So, you know, it's as simple as that. I think that we have a relationship, but the key is not being afraid.
Yeah, and that point you make is really fascinating, because I observed, you know, in the kind of 3 months, let's say, after Abu Dhabi, there was almost like there were several moments where the media weren't covering anything, and then as soon as somebody, be it a driver or you know, a journalist such as yourself, did say something, then suddenly they were like, "Oh, I can say that," and then everyone said it.
Yeah, I think that's right, because the tone was quite difficult to take after Abu Dhabi. Like, it was funny because the assumption was you're either in a Red Bull camp or a Mercedes camp, but the majority of people weren't that way. You know, they weren't thinking like that at the time. It was more of a, what the hell is going on? And you know, I think from my perspective, it's always looking further down the road, as to say, you know, are they going to protest it? Is this race going to be decided? Are we going to have a rerun? What's going to happen? That's where my thought process was. It wasn't about, you know, well done, Max, or tough Lewis. And, you know, the Massey stuff, although was difficult and quite hard to come to grips with at the time, I think we, as journalists, wanted to have a little bit more information for us to be massively comfortable with our condemnation of Massey and the FIA. And I think, as I say to you like a minute ago, like that's why we were disappointed with this report, because we wanted to hammer him if indeed he was wrong. But we never got to the bottom of that, and because it's all been covered up, as I say, we never know. So yeah, tricky, eh?
Well, no, and look, I appreciate the length you've just gone to there to explain your view and how it felt as you were going through it in this. And I'll hand over to Denz now. Thanks a lot, Ben. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Hey, well, no, I was sitting there with my popcorn tuning into that one because, I think it answered just a lot of questions that everybody's just had in the back of their mind as well. And then what I really appreciate with you as well, Ben, is that you just say it as it is. There's no kind of
No.
payroll underneath the table, kind of hidden agendas. You just call it out as it is, which is all we can ever really ask of the journalist, So let's take it to kind of lighter note anyway, because we like to do this as well with our special guests too. We got some interactive questions, Ben. So in some of them, you'll be able to pick some drivers, but bear in mind, if you pick that driver, you then won't be able to use them again for some of the other questions. So there's an element of strategy. Hopefully you'll do better than Ferrari with that. But, but the first one, Ben, we'll go for it, is Taxi Dinner Avoid. So it's like a really bad spin-off of the
hang on a minute. Taxi Dinner or what was the last one?
Avoid.
Oh, Avoid. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it's a pretty bad spin-off of the legendary BBC show, Snug Marry Avoid.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad we didn't say the original version. Can I just say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry, man. Your wife won't have to do anything for now. But yeah, just Ben, just gonna set the scene. So imagine you've got to travel into town because you're gonna have dinner with one of the drivers, and to get there, obviously you have to call up an Uber, and you also have to pick a driver for that. And then whilst you're at the restaurant having dinner with the driver you do want to have dinner with, of course, there's one driver, man, you're giving him the side eyes. You're just trying to basically avoid him at all costs. So who are you going to pick for your taxi dinner and avoid?
Are we doing this with current drivers on the grid?
Yeah, for this question, it will be current drivers.
Right. Okay. Right. Then I'm going to keep my powder dry because I'm not sure what your other questions are coming up. But the avoid one I can do. I would comfortably say that's Lance Stroll. Yeah. I've got no real relationship or anything with him. That's not because I'm nasty or hate him or anything. He would be the one that I avoid. In terms of my driver, let's pick Fernando. And in terms of who I'm going to have dinner with, I'm doing a book on Lando, so let's say Lando.
Ooh, okay, that's exciting. Are there any details you can tell us about that at the moment, Ben?
It's out next year. It's just a biography that I'm doing, digging into his life before getting into Formula One, and obviously, his career. And I know he hasn't been in it very long, but he is certainly an engaging character. Someone I spend quite a lot of time with every week. We'll speak to him at a race and catch up with him. And so, I'm quite excited. It's with Icon Books, but it's out in the new year.
That's going to be extremely exciting, Ben. And also, to tap into that a bit more, how would you describe working with Lando? Because at least on TV, we see Lando as this very bashful driver. He's kind of very self-deprecating and things don't go the way they should. I think at times, not in a bad way, but I think he's just got that typical British sense of humor in a way, just with sarcasm and stuff like that.
He is what is exactly. Is what you see is what you get with, and that's what's great. He doesn't change from talking to the TVs as he does for us, as some drivers have done in the past. Very approachable. He's become very good at replying to questions. I always think, one of Lewis Hamilton's strengths is that you can ask him a question about something else in the world, and he'll have an opinion on it. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. I can't name another sports star, male or female, who has such a wide range of opinions and isn't afraid to speak about them. So When taking the knee happened, he was very good on that. He was very good on Trump. He's been fantastic on a number of subjects, and I really do applaud that. And I think that Lando is now beginning. I'm not saying he's in the same ilk as Lewis in terms of his ability to speak about lots of different subjects, but he is able to talk a lot about mental health, for instance. That's a very taboo thing, generally, and certainly in motor racing, it's almost seen, certainly by some of the older heads in the paddock, as almost a weakness. But Lando's obviously very open, and I think that's very good. It's great for the sport. It's great for him that we've got someone like that who's able to talk and feel comfortable about talking about subjects. So there we go. That's my answer to the Lando question.
Well, it's insightful, and I think again gives us so much more to it as well, Ben. Because, like I said too, with Lando, he's always an intriguing character, and there's elements of him that remind me of Lewis when he was kind of a bit younger. Damon Hill as well, in the way that he goes about answering questions. But he's such a kind of like cheerful chappy in one aspect, but also very honest as well. It's almost like he doesn't have a filter, which I think is needed these days too. So
very good.
Great to get that insight. Okay, so the next interactive question, Ben. So, the big gaffer from the sun gives you a ring, right, Ben? And you'll be glad to know you won't need your P45 because he's actually going to put you on a different project. And that's going to be that he wants you to collaboratively work with Netflix as the creative director on a documentary about a rivalry in F1 or motorsport. And for this question, we had just the normal kind of Senna, Prost, Lauda, Hunt. That's been well documented. So if you had to pick a rivalry with an F1 or just motorsport generally, how would you spend who would you spend the budget on, basically?
They would never do it, but the one that I really loved was working with Lewis and Nico. That was a fantastic dynamic, and watching that play out week after week was really, really good. And that's a really good book to be done one day. Lewis has hinted about it in the past. He's like, one day you'll all understand when the book comes out. I think that was wonderful. Privy to certain things, and a bit of banter and a bit of rubbing each other up the wrong way, but there's so much more to it that we need to get stuck into one day.
It's going to be really exciting, Ben. And like even this with Nico as well, like I think I was watching one of his podcasts and he was talking about like learning the gamership of like winding people up and like playing psychological mind games, and this whole thing about him
100%.
basically having to share like a toilet with like Michael Schumacher in the pit stall, and basically Michael like deliberately like hogging up the toilet to just unnerve Nico before Q1. And all of those things, I could see Nico probably like putting a feather in his cap and learning those things to try
100%,
and unravel Lewis.
Jensen and Lewis, well, Jensen used to be like that with Lewis when they were together at McLaren. There would be things that Jensen would do, to try and get in Lewis's mind. I was just saying about the games, wasn't I? I mean, Jensen and Lewis used to play games with them, and that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, and Ben actually, coming back off of our technical difficulties, like a Ferrari pit stop. could you enlighten us, as to some of the mind games going on there and stuff like that too? Because that was like the original Brit-Sadies, I guess, before we obviously now have George and Lewis as well.
Yeah, I don't think the thing is I don't know if that still goes on at Mercedes. I think that George and Lewis is a very manageable relationship for Toto. I think it's really hassle-free. But that said, I'm not sure whether that's the case at other teams. I just know that in the past that certainly it was more common for the two drivers to play tricks on each other. I'm convinced that probably Fernando plays tricks on Esteban, and I'm sure that he will be doing that next year as well when he's with Lance.
Oh, for sure. And I can imagine just that dynamic too. And in a way, that's an interesting one as well, Ben, because I mean, like most people, I guess, on the outside kind of see the second driver in that Aston Martin as the one that's going to be kind of like walking a tight line, to say, because obviously they're driving against the son of the guy that owns the team, essentially.
Yes.
But with Fernando and just the way he is, I just don't think he gives a damn. So it'll be interesting to just see like him and this like his never die attitude and his like sometimes his kind of like ways of not wanting to compromise, how that will work against like Stroll, which basically owns the team. Just how that dynamic works as well.
I'm looking forward to seeing that and how that's going to work. It's going to be very, very interesting to watch that dynamic. If you look at the way that team's been run and the way that the heavy recruitment that they've done, they spent fortunes and fortunes on building that team. But ultimately, as I was talking before about having a good championship, I think if you're serious about scoring decent points and winning championships, then you need to have two good drivers. And I think that Lawrence probably needs to make a decision then, what he does with Lance, because I'm not convinced that Lance is consistently good enough at this moment in time for them to win a championship.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair kind of kind of conclusion on that one as well, Ben, because with Lance has been interesting too. I mean, to say, he's a pay driver is the obvious, but in his time, he's picked up one or two podiums, so kind of gets that. He's had the one very bizarre pole lap as well at Turkey. I don't know if you remember that one, which again was really bizarre.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I could only imagine this how like gloomy it must have been with the rain and then just cars going off the circuit, and then look at the timing sheets and it's like Lance with a very memeable kind of moment at the top. Exactly, but that's kind of the gift of Formula One at times as well. It does have the ability once in a blue moon to give us these bizarre results, and the fact that an underdog team as well, on its day, can have its moment of glory as well. So absolutely,
100%, and I think that's part of the magic, isn't it? Is seeing a team like that just, I don't want to say luck in, but obviously get the result that was unexpected.
It's so true, and it's a weird one as well, Ben, because my attitude towards Aston Martin as well is kind of like teeter-tottered when they were like Force India and it was Vijay Mallya and Bob Fernley. I was like, these are the guys, and then obviously when they had that consortium of Lawrence Stroll and the guys take it over, it was almost like watching like, your favorite like Division 1 team as such, like go commercial and sell out.
See, we've gone back into that football analogy again, haven't we?
We really have. But it's interesting, like Blag said as well earlier, there's so many parallels you could actually draw between the two sports, and they're so fundamentally different in their own ways as well, but have contrasting similarities as well. So that always has its thing too. But the last interactive question, Ben, we'll go for is the hot lap experience day. So going back to current drivers on the grid. Bear in mind, now you can't use Stroll, which I don't think you're going to use for this one anyway.
No, I wouldn't. No,
not for a hot lap. Yeah. And then, like you've got Alonso.
You said that, not me. See.
Plausible deniability, I call that one. But you've obviously got Lando as well, and you mentioned Alonso too. So, Ben, if you had to pick a hot lap experience day, and you could pick any track, it doesn't even have to be a track that's on the current calendar, but you had to pick a current driver on the grid that we haven't already mentioned. Right. What track would you select, and which driver would you go for the hot lap?
Okay, look, I've done a few hot laps, and I've been fortunate enough to do a few hot laps with Lewis. So I'm going to take him out of the equation here before anyone starts saying, "Oh, you hate Lewis and this, that, and that." He, for me, is a phenomenal driver. The best driver in F1 history is how I ranked him. I think he's an absolute legend. But if I'm being honest, I want to get in a car with someone that I've never been in a car with before. So I would pick Max because of that reason. I've never been in a car. And if I was picking a track, I will pick Suzuka because I think that is the most complete track. I've been around a lot of them. But Suzuka, I've never been round in a car. I've walked around it, but never been round in a car. So that would be the two that I would pick for that. Just because I've never done it.
Yeah, and great choices there as well, Ben, because, we talk about Suzuka and even that circuit, it has kind of like, it's kind of dark moments. We touched on Bianchi earlier, which was very like heartbreaking. But on top
Yeah.
of that as well, some iconic moments. You know, when you think
Mhm.
about obviously Senna and Prost going into that
Yeah.
final chicane,
Yeah.
that infamous kind of moment. Oh, Murray Walker as well. You know, when Graham Hill took his championship and he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, and Graham Hill crosses the line, and I have to take a pause because I've got a lump in my throat." I was
Yeah.
like, "Wow, does he could really hit? Like, it would almost make the goosebumps on your skin just grow." Just that moment, and yeah, just the nature of the circuit with 130R as well, and the sweeping
Yeah,
S's.
that's it. That's it. I mean, there's loads to it, and it is a really strange event to cover. The fans are fantastic. It's just a different, we spoke about traveling earlier on in the year, and people say, what's the best venue? And for me, I will always say Austin, because I like, it's not so much about the racing. I like barbecue food, and I like live music. So purely from a city point of view, that's one of the good ones. But I think from a cultural point of view and being put out of my comfort zone. So I equate it to going on holiday for the first time as a kid, when you sort of go abroad. And for me, it was to Spain, and not understanding any of the language or any of the culture. I still get that feeling when I go to Japan, because I can't understand Japanese. The culture is very different. When you're ordering food, you don't really know what you're going to get, because you can't read the menu, and you're going by a picture, which is probably about 400 years old or something. And it's part of the fun. And I think that's what I really like about Japan, not just the food, the culture, but the fans are great as well. They really do sort of take it to the next level. There's lots of people dressed up in various different sort of, you see the hats with DRS wings, rear wings on, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe someone's made this. But yeah, they go to great lengths. People dressing up as racing drivers and all sorts of stuff. It's bonkers, but really, really good fun.
Oh, Ben, I do envy you. Put it that way. I do envy you, because it sounds just sensational and something I could only dream of. And speaking of dreams as well, we do have a quite high contingent of Team LH fans that follow the podcast. So I'd be
Yeah.
remiss if I didn't ask as well. What was the hot lap, or what have the hot laps even been like with Lewis? Because I think I
Yeah.
watched one where he did like a TV day at oh gosh, I can't believe it's escaped me now. It's like the Mercedes-Benz Museum in
I've done one there at the Mercedes-Benz World.
Yeah.
I've done one at the Top Gear test track as well, down in Dunsfold. So I think that's the two that I've done with Lewis. I've done Lando at Kota, so in Austin. I've done a hot lap with Jules Bianchi. I've done one with Stoffel. I've done one with Stoffel Van Dorn. Done a couple with Valtteri Bottas. So yeah, I mean, there's been a few. But yeah, the Lewis one's always good fun. He always destroys the tires, and I think that's part of the fun. I remember the guys at Mercedes World were like, he just kept burning up these tires and bringing the cars back. He's like, look, the tires are gone. You know that whole Bono, the tires are gone.
Yeah.
Am I living in the same world as this? Is this what's happening? But it's quite funny. They were just going through these endless sets of, I assume they were Continentals. I don't know for sure. It might be another brand, but whatever on the car at the time, he was just going through these tires, and the guys were like, "Look, you're gonna have to stop him because we're running out of cars. We're running out of tires." So, yeah.
That's sensational. That is amazing. And again, like you mentioned too, that is typically Lewis, when he comes on the radio and he has his customary, "Oh no, my tires are gone," or "These tires are finished," or "Can we change these tires?" Or there's always something with them.
Well, I remember the first one. The first one I did was when he was at McLaren. It was like, one of the first meetings we had, and he was trying to frighten me, I think, because he was like, "Have you done one of these before?" And I was like, "No, not for a long time," And he was like, "Okay, fine." And he was constantly turning his head to look at me to sort of gauge my reaction as he was going around. I think he was trying to make me cry or something. But, he didn't succeed. So I think we even have a little bit of respect at the end of that. But yeah, it was quite funny. I did watch one of my colleagues actually end up crawling out of the car.
Wow.
He was left in a really bad way. Yeah. Dizzy and all sorts.
Oh God! Well, shout out to your colleague as well, because yeah, I don't know if Mercedes offer any counselling, but it might be required after a lap with Lewis. It's maybe a side business or hustle I can probably entice the team to get into. But
Yeah.
Ben, this has been an incredible episode. Like, we as a team, we're so thankful for your time as well, because, we've been able to have a dialogue on so many different, like, aspects of the sport, kind of the work that you do, life in the paddock and traveling with the circus to say as such as well. Kind of final question I always like to kind of ask, like, the special guests like yourself, Ben, is, are there any other, like, experiences you're looking forward to this year? And also, what advice would you give to younger Ben Hunt, or just in general, the future generation of star journalists like yourself, working their way through school and uni and kind of the process?
Okay. I'm always very open if people ever want to, reach out and say, how do I get in to journalism? Because I remember being that student wanting to live out my dream. So, if people do want to get in touch, then sure, by all means, reach out and I'll see if I can help out. I can't give you a job, but I can try and help point you in the right direction. So that's what I would definitely suggest. I think that a lot of people make the mistake that, it's easy to get into F1. You just automatically get given the opportunity, but it most clearly isn't. My route wasn't through F1. It was through football. And I remember covering a game at Canvey Island, which was nowhere near where I lived, when Chelsea were playing Barcelona. And everyone in the world was watching Chelsea and Barcelona, and I was working at Canvey Island. And I remember thinking to myself, crikey, like, I wish I was watching that game. But it was quite a moment where I thought, this is where I've got to start out. I've got to start at the bottom and work my way up. And that's what I did. And that's what I've seen with the colleagues of mine who are in Formula One now, who didn't go into football or other sports, but they started at lower formula. So, there's nothing stopping anyone from being a journalist. There's nothing stopping anyone from picking up a phone or, the iPad or computer and send off some emails to press officers at championships lower down. Think karting, think your local go-kart track, think, W Series, think Formula 3, and start making inroads there, because, there's a whole load of stories there that people like myself aren't really looking at. We're missing lots of stuff. So, I know that the F3 is on and F2 is on the F1 bill, but, I'm finding out stories about these drivers all the time. And, they're really good stories. And I think, crikey, I should go and do that story. But of course, that story is only out there because someone has already done it or told me. And of course, it's being first and getting into that. So I think that a lot of people just assume, oh, well, if I'm not doing F1, I'm not interested. But if you are interested and you want to get to F1, then you've got to be prepared to do the hard work, make the contacts, because those drivers ultimately will be the guys that do come into F1 or race against other people in F1. So, they're good contacts to have. Plus, I'd also say that it's easier to make your mistakes in those championships as well. I made some horrendous mistakes earlier in my career, and I remember them and thinking, Christ, why did I do that? I did an interview with Kevin Peterson, the former England cricketer, and I spelt his name wrong throughout the whole piece. And I submitted it to the Sun at the time, and I had a phone call. He's like, "What's this?" And I was like, "Well, it's my piece from Kevin Peterson." He's like, "You spelled his name wrong all the way through," and I don't know why I didn't check, but ever since then, you obviously check how you spell people's surnames. But it was good to make that mistake at the start of my career and not now, because you learn along the way. And I think that's the big mistake that people don't do. They just assume that they can get to F1 straight away and they're going to get given this job. But you've got to start somewhere, and that somewhere usually is a little step away from Formula One. So that's really what I would suggest. Don't be afraid to get stuck in, but obviously keep your level of expectation in check. Don't just assume that you're going to get to F1 straight away.
Golden advice there, Ben. I absolutely second everything you said there as well, and it's true, for a lot of people, unless, you have somebody on the inside, or unless your dad's, Lawrence Stroll, there's no kind of like, golden ticket to Charlie's Chocolate Factory for the majority of us. as you mentioned, it's just being perseverant, learning from mistakes as well, having a kind of measured approach and trying to develop and kind of focus at getting good yourself, as you
Yep.
go through the ranks and the kind of hurdles of kind of progression. But as you mentioned there as well, like once you go through those motions and you finally get everything to click after so many years of dedication and practice and really like, crafting your kind of like skill, then
Yeah.
the world is your oyster in that regard as well. And it's just so aspirational for so many of our young audience listeners as well to take on board the feedback you've given as well, Ben. So
Cool.
huge thank you to you, for your time. And on top of that,
No
we'd
problem.
love to have you back on
Nice
for
talking to
future
you.
episodes, because it's
Yeah,
been great.
absolutely.
One
Absolutely.
final question, just before you go, and it's funny. Georgina makes me ask this one. I'm like, one day you're gonna get me punched by a really angry Italian, but I think I'll be okay with you asking this one. Ben is
Go on.
she loves to ask people, pineapple on pizza, yay
Yes.
or nay?
100%. My favorite. Do you know what? It's really funny.
Ben, have I told you yet that I really love you? I love you, man.
Okay, right. I'm going to tell you a little story because I know I've been talking loads, but I was in Italy obviously last week, and we were talking, and I'm a big believer that Italian food is very, very highly rated, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that view. I'm not a massive pasta fan. I'm not a massive pizza fan. But that said, my favorite pizza, and I had people absolutely disgusted with me last week, is a pizza I had at my mum and dad's house near where they lived, and it's called a Showboat, and it's actually got banana on it. So it's got chicken, tomato base. It's got cheese, chicken, sweet corn, onion, and banana.
What was it taste like? Was it like a crunchy flavor?
No, it's the banana's soft. It's cooked, so it's soft banana. But yeah, it's next level to pineapple. So give it a try. Don't be afraid.
And if there are any pizza companies out there, Domino's, Pizza Hut, Papa John's,
everyone's just switched off now because they think that he's some weird bloke that has banana on a pizza. You can't knock it until you try it. Honestly, it's the best.
Either that, Ben, or actually we might, after this episode, Georgina might have to file a patent to actually get that absolutely just like copyrighted within the Stripping the Dipping family. Because that is actually I'm gonna let like F1blag have a word on that too. So Blag, you missed the best part, man. Like Ben is an advocate not only just for pineapple on pizza, but banana on pizza. Thoughts?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, I know why my internet is completely messed up. There was a disturbance in the space-time continuum. What? Banana on pizza? You mean banana or plantain or what? What's going on?
No. It's just normal banana. I'm actually trying to Google it now. Actually, I'm not sure they do it anymore. Let me find it. Yeah, I mean, it was just great. It had banana in it, chicken, all the ingredients which I mentioned earlier on. I'm just honestly, I can't find it. I'm desperate to find this.
Ben, you might have to delete your search history after.
Honestly, it was great, absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
That's a new
take your word for
recommendation.
that. Yeah. Gosh.
Well, on that revolutionary bombshell, to say the least.
The pineapple banana bombshell.
It's been a banana bombshell. It's like throwing a banana peel at somebody on Mario Kart. That's the level of bombshell we just had. But Ben,
you know what I'm thinking right now? I'm just thinking what would Vincenzo would think.
Oh yeah, well, just to give Ben context too, like Vincenzo's like again somebody kind of in our Twitter space that's a huge like Ferrari head. He says Ferrari like Ferrari. He has like everything that is like quintessentially Italian is just Vincenzo Landino. So somebody will have to clip this up as well and send it to him.
He will not dig my pizza choices, will he?
Oh yeah, I think you'll be having some stern words.
Yeah. I don't. He probably won't invite me back.
I think the Tifosi will probably be after you as well on this one, Ben. But just know though, We're in your corner. We're in your corner. But Ben, it's been sensational to have you on, man. Like you've been a great guest. You put us onto this so much. I think that there's something in this episode for this everyone, which is amazing, you know. And we're super excited just to continue to see the work that you do as well. Just keep it up, as you mentioned as well. Don't let the haters or trolls, put you off. Haters gonna hate and potatoes gonna potate, as F1bлаг's kind of screen name says as well. But yeah, Ben, any final words, and where can our adoring fans find you as well on social media?
I'm mainly on Twitter and Instagram. My Twitter is Ben J Hunt. That's my handle, and my stuff is published at The Sun, the UK newspaper.
Well, there we go, guys. You heard it from the legend himself, Ben Hunt. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Ben. You know, and we've had some really. I always say this, but I think this is kind of topped up on the leaderboard. Like, just the variety of conversations and just the way we're able to kind of extrapolate it all and kind of discuss it was amazing. So, you know, we were very excited to hopefully be able to bring you on again, maybe perhaps towards the end of the season where more of the madness unfolds. But it's been amazing, Ben. Thank you so much for your time.
Good stuff. No problem.
Just thank you so much. And guys, you know, from us here at Stripping the Dipping, it's been your boy Denzel Clarkson, aka AMG Denz, aka the MDM, the modern day Morgan Freeman. And I'm with my dynamic host as well, F1blag. Blag, any final words?
Pass to me at the end, and then I always pass the hot potato back because I hate closing episodes. But yeah, final words is my internet is made of banana and pineapple, and I'm sticking to that. And Ben, absolute pleasure. Really great that you're kind of leading the blue checkmark brigade and keeping, you know, the people in F1 honest, and that's all we can ask for. So thank you.
No problem. No worries.
And back to you, Denz, to close out, because you know I hate closing the episode.
I had to do it to you anyway, bro. I had to. But yeah, guys, as always, make sure that you check us out, Stripping the Dipping on Twitter, on YouTube. We're trying to get our numbers up. We're trying to get that engagement, you know, because there are lots of, prima donna F1 drivers that won't speak to us because, we need those numbers up. So if you can, please, you know, share, like, get, you know, your friends of friends to check it out as well. We try and, you know, have as many interesting and engaging conversations as we can. And I think, you know, Ben is just one of the superstar guests as well that, you know, kind of helps us on this journey that we're on as well. So huge shout out to Ben and a great shout out to our listeners as well. Until next time, guys, it's been AMG Denz from Stripping the Dipping, and we're out. Peace.